Welcome to DCF Investigations. On a sweltering afternoon in late July, the asphalt of a parking lot in suburban Detroit shimmered under the summer sun. It was a Wednesday, July 30, 1975. A day that would mark the end of an era and the beginning of the greatest unsolved mystery in American organized crime history. The location was the Machus Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan, a modest establishment that would forever be etched into the national consciousness not for its cuisine, but for what happened in its shadow. Standing next to his green Pontiac Granville was a man who had once held the power to bring the entire United States economy to a grinding halt. He was impatient, checking his watch, pacing the pavement, and making frantic phone calls from a payphone. He was waiting for a meeting that was supposed to settle old scores and pave his way back to the throne he believed was rightfully his. But the men he was waiting for never walked through the doors of the restaurant. At some point after 2:45 in the afternoon, the man vanished. He left behind no blood, no struggle, and no witnesses willing to speak. Jimmy Hoffa simply ceased to exist. To understand the magnitude of this disappearance, we must first peel back the layers of history to understand the man himself. James Riddle Hoffa was not merely a union boss, he was a titan of the 20th century, a figure of Shakespearean complexity who rose from the poverty of the Great Depression to become one of the most powerful men in the world. Born in Brazil, Indiana, in 1913, his father died when he was young, forcing him to work to support his family. This early hardship forged a diamond-hard resolve in Hoffa. By the time he was a teenager, working in a Detroit warehouse, he was already organizing strikes. He learned early that in the brutal world of labor relations, power was the only currency that mattered. As he climbed the ranks of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, Hoffa became a hero to the working class. He secured pension plans, health care, and wages that allowed truck drivers to enter the middle class. To his members, he was a savior. But to the federal government and corporate America, he was a menace. Hoffa understood that to fight the corporate giants, he needed muscle, and he found it in an unholy alliance with the Mafia. He allowed mobsters to access the massive Teamsters Central States Pension Fund, using the union's money to build Las Vegas casinos and finance illicit operations. In exchange, the mob provided the heavy hand needed to keep members in line and intimidate employers. It was a deal with the devil that would fuel his rise and ultimately seal his fate. By the late 1950s, Hoffa was the president of the Teamsters, and he had a target on his back. Robert F. Kennedy, serving as chief counsel for the Senate Labor Rackets Committee and later as Attorney General, made it his personal crusade to bring Hoffa down. The feud between the two men was legendary, a clash of wills that played out on national television. Kennedy saw Hoffa as the personification of corruption, while Hoffa saw Kennedy as a privileged elitist who knew nothing of the struggles of the working man. Despite the relentless pressure, Hoffa remained untouchable for years, famously quipping that he had no friends, only associates. However, the law eventually caught up with him. In 1964, he was convicted of jury tampering and fraud, and by 1967, he was behind bars at the Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. Even from his prison cell, Hoffa tried to run the union, but his grip was slipping. He had installed Frank Fitzsimmons, a loyal but pliable underling, as his placeholder. But Fitzsimmons grew to like the power, and more importantly, the mob liked Fitzsimmons. He was easier to control, less volatile, and didn't demand the same cut of the action that Hoffa did. When President Richard Nixon commuted Hoffa's sentence in 1971, there was a catch. A restriction was placed on Hoffa's release, barring him from engaging in union activities until 1980. Hoffa was furious. He believed the restriction was a conspiracy orchestrated by Fitzsimmons and the Nixon administration, likely at the behest of the mob bosses who wanted to keep him out of the game. This context is critical to understanding the events of 1975. Hoffa was not a man to go quietly into retirement. He was fighting the legal restriction in court, and more dangerously, he was campaigning on the ground to reclaim the presidency of the Teamsters. He was threatening to expose the mob's infiltration of the pension fund if they didn't support his comeback. He was making noise, he was making threats, and he was making the most dangerous men in America very nervous. The summer of 1975 was a powder keg, and Jimmy Hoffa was holding the match. The timeline of July 30th is a sequence of mundane actions that lead to a catastrophic conclusion. Hoffa began his day early at his summer cottage in Lake Orion, Michigan. He was in good spirits, according to his wife, Josephine. He told her he had a meeting that afternoon with two men he had a complicated history with: Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, a street boss for the Detroit Mafia, and Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, a powerful Teamsters boss from New Jersey and a capo regime in the Genovese crime family. The meeting was ostensibly to settle a feud between Hoffa and Provenzano and to secure their support for his return to power. Hoffa left his home around 1:15 in the afternoon, driving his green Pontiac. He made a stop at a local business, possibly a florist or a limousine service, where he chatted briefly with staff. He seemed relaxed. He arrived at the Machus Red Fox at approximately 2 o'clock. The choice of location was strategic. It was a public place in an upscale neighborhood, which Hoffa likely believed offered him a layer of safety. He parked his car, unlocked, and walked into the restaurant. He asked the reception staff if anyone had asked for him. No one had. He sat at a table for a while, but as the minutes ticked by, his patience wore thin. He walked out to the parking lot, standing by his car, scanning the passing vehicles. At 2:15, he went to a payphone near a hardware store adjacent to the restaurant. He called his wife, Josephine, complaining that Giacalone and Provenzano were late. He famously told her, "They are standing me up." It was the last time she would ever hear his voice. He also made a call to a close associate, Louis Lanteau, who ran a limousine service. He sounded agitated, but not panicked. Eyewitness accounts from this point become the fragmented pieces of a puzzle that has never been fully solved. A truck driver reported seeing Hoffa standing by his car, talking to men in a maroon Mercury Marquis. Another witness claimed to see Hoffa in the back seat of a car driving out of the lot, looking calm, with another man in the front passenger seat and a driver. The car turned onto Telegraph Road and merged into the traffic. That was the moment the earth seemed to swallow him whole. When Hoffa failed to return home that evening, Josephine knew something was terribly wrong. It was uncharacteristic of him not to check in. By the next morning, the police were notified. When authorities arrived at the Machus Red Fox, they found the green Pontiac unlocked. Inside, they found his sunglasses and a pair of white gloves on the back seat. The car offered no clues to a struggle. There were no bullet holes, no blood spatter, no signs of a forced abduction. It appeared that Jimmy Hoffa had entered the vehicle that took him away voluntarily. This detail alone suggests that he knew the people in the car. He trusted them, or at least he did not fear them enough to run. The investigation that followed was one of the most extensive in FBI history. Codenamed Hoffex, the Bureau quickly assembled a list of suspects that read like a who's who of the American Mafia. The primary theory was that the hit had been sanctioned by the Commission, the ruling body of the Mafia, to prevent Hoffa from regaining control of the Teamsters and potentially cooperating with authorities to expose the pension fund fraud. Let us delve into the profiles of the key players in this conspiracy, for in their histories lie the probable truth of what happened that afternoon. First, there was Anthony Tony Provenzano. Hoffa and Provenzano had once been allies, but their relationship had soured into a bitter hatred while they were both imprisoned at Lewisburg. They had fought over union benefits, and the animosity was personal. Provenzano was a ruthless figure, known for his violent temper. On the day Hoffa disappeared, Provenzano was conspicuously playing cards at a union hall in Union City, New Jersey, far away from Detroit. It was a solid alibi, perhaps too solid. Investigators believed he was the mastermind who ordered the hit, or at least the one who lured Hoffa to the meeting, even if he never intended to show up. Then there was Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone. He was the local Detroit mobster who had arranged the meeting. Like Provenzano, Giacalone had a meticulous alibi for that afternoon, spending time at the Southfield Athletic Club, where he made sure to be seen by multiple witnesses. His absence at the restaurant was the first sign to Hoffa that something was wrong. But by then, the trap had already been sprung. The most tragic figure in this cast of suspects is Charles Chuckie O'Brien. O'Brien was Hoffa's foster son. Hoffa had taken him in, raised him, and treated him like family. However, in the months leading up to the disappearance, they had fallen out over O'Brien's alignment with the Fitzsimmons faction. O'Brien became the center of the investigation because he was driving a maroon 1975 Mercury Marquis on that day, a car that matched the description of the vehicle seen picking Hoffa up. The car belonged to Joey Giacalone, the son of Tony Jack. Forensic analysis of the Mercury Marquis years later would yield a critical piece of evidence. In 2001, DNA technology had advanced enough to test a hair found in the vehicle. The results concluded that the hair belonged to Jimmy Hoffa. Furthermore, police dogs had earlier indicated the scent of Hoffa in the back seat and the trunk. O'Brien vehemently denied any involvement until his death, claiming he was delivering a fish to a friend's house, which he used to explain the presence of blood that was initially suspected to be human, but was inconclusive. The betrayal of a son, even a foster one, adds a layer of Shakespearean tragedy to the narrative. If O'Brien was driving, it explains why Hoffa got into the car without a struggle. He saw a familiar face, a family member, and let his guard down. Another central figure, made famous by the book I Heard You Paint Houses and the subsequent film The Irishman, is Frank Sheeran. Sheeran was a hulking labor official and hitman who was fiercely loyal to Hoffa, but ultimately more loyal to his mob bosses, Russell Bufalino and Angelo Bruno. Sheeran claimed late in his life that he was the one who pulled the trigger. According to his account, he was in the car with O'Brien and another hitman, Sal Bergoglio. They drove Hoffa to a house in northwest Detroit. Sheeran claimed he and Hoffa walked into the house, and as Hoffa realized it was an ambush, Sheeran shot him twice in the back of the head. While Sheeran's confession is compelling and detailed, Many experts and FBI agents have cast doubt on its complete accuracy. They argue that Sheeran was a braggart who inflated his role in mob history. However, forensic teams did find blood splatters under the floorboards of the house Sheeran identified, though the DNA was too degraded to match directly to Hoffa. Whether Sheeran pulled the trigger or was simply part of the logistics, his involvement remains a prominent theory. The role of Salvatore Sal Briguglio cannot be overlooked. A trusted associate of Tony Provenzano, Briguglio was a known killer. Informants told the FBI that Briguglio was the one who actually killed Hoffa, or at the very least, was in the car to ensure the job was done. Briguglio himself would meet a violent end a few years later, gunned down in New York City's Little Italy, a common fate for those who know where the bodies are buried. We must also look at the Detroit Partnership's leadership, specifically the Toxer brothers and the Corrado family, who controlled the local underworld. No hit of this magnitude could happen in Detroit without their sanction. It was a coordinated effort between the Genovese family in New York and the Detroit organization, united by a common desire to silence a man who had become a liability. The investigation into the disposal of the body is where the story fractures into a dozen different directions, each more gruesome and cinematic than the last. The initial and most persistent theory was that Hoffa was taken to a local sanitation company, possibly the Central Sanitation Services in Hamtramck, which was owned by mob associates. There, it is theorized his body was incinerated in a trash compactor or commercial incinerator. This method would explain the total lack of physical remains. In the days following the disappearance, the FBI noted an uptick in activity at the facility, but by the time they obtained warrants, the trail was cold. Another theory suggests he was buried in the concrete foundation of a massive construction project. The most famous version of this legend is that Hoffa is buried under the end zone of Giant Stadium in New Jersey. This theory took hold of the public imagination, but it defies logic. Transporting a body across state lines from Michigan to New Jersey poses an immense risk. Why drive hundreds of miles with the most wanted corpse in America when there are thousands of acres of forest and lakes in Michigan? In 2010, when Giant Stadium was demolished, the FBI did not find any remains, largely putting this myth to rest. Over the decades, the FBI has conducted numerous digs based on tips from dying mobsters and informants looking for leverage. They have dug up horse farms in Michigan, torn apart driveways in suburban Detroit, and excavated land near old mob hangouts. In 2006, they searched the Hidden Dreams farm in Milford Township. In 2013, they brought heavy equipment to a field in Oakland Township based on a tip from a former underboss. In each instance, the media swarmed, the excavators clawed at the earth, and in each instance, they found nothing. The earth kept its secrets. One of the more grotesque theories involves a fat rendering plant. Some informants suggested Hoffa's body was ground up and rendered into animal fat or fertilizer, a method of disposal that leaves absolutely no trace, not even bone fragments. This theory aligns with the sheer brutality and efficiency of the mob hitmen of that era. They were not looking to send a message by leaving a body on the street. They were looking to erase a man from history. We must also consider the atmosphere of the investigation itself. The FBI in 1975 was under immense pressure. They were dealing with the post-Watergate fallout and the Church Committee hearings, which were exposing intelligence abuses. The Hoffa case was a high-priority opportunity to restore public faith. They interviewed hundreds of witnesses, wiretapped countless phones, and convened grand juries. Yet, they hit a wall of silence. The omerta, the code of silence, was holding strong. Witnesses developed sudden amnesia. Suspects lawyered up. The fear of the Mafia was palpable. People knew that if they spoke, they would be next. The media frenzy surrounding the case cannot be overstated. Hoffa was a celebrity. His face was as recognizable as the president's. Every news channel, every newspaper ran daily updates. The mystery spawned books, movies, and songs. It became a part of American folklore. But amidst the sensationalism, the human tragedy often got lost. Josephine Hoffa spent the rest of her life waiting for a husband who would never come home. She died in 1980, 5 years after he vanished, never knowing the truth. Her grief was compounded by the constant rumors and the jokes made by late-night comedians. To the world, he was a punchline or a puzzle. To her, he was the man she had loved since she was a teenager on the picket lines. As we analyze the legacy of this case, we see that Hoffa's disappearance marked the beginning of the end for the traditional American Mafia. The heat brought down by the investigation exposed the inner workings of the syndicate. It forced the government to aggressively use the RICO Act, the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, to dismantle the hierarchies of the crime families. The very act intended to save their empire, killing Hoffa, ultimately accelerated their decline. The Teamsters Union, too, underwent a long and painful process of reform, eventually being taken over by federal oversight to root out the corruption that Hoffa had institutionalized. Today, the case remains officially open, but it is a cold case in the truest sense. Most of the principal suspects, Provenzano, Giacalone, O'Brien, Sheeran, Bufalino, are dead. They took the location of the body to their graves. The FBI occasionally receives new tips, and forensic technology continues to advance, offering a glimmer of hope that perhaps a microscopic trace of evidence might one day surface. But the reality is that the physical remains of Jimmy Hoffa are likely gone forever, destroyed by men who were experts in making problems disappear. The story of Jimmy Hoffa is a cautionary tale about the nature of power. It is a story about how the ambition that drives a man to the top can also be the architect of his destruction. Hoffa believed he could control the mob, that he could use them as a tool and then put them back in the box. He failed to realize that when you invite predators into your home, you eventually become the prey. He was a man of immense contradictions, a champion of the worker who stole from their pensions, a loving family man who ordered violence against his enemies, a brilliant strategist who walked blindly into a trap. In the end, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa is not just a murder mystery. It is a ghost story that haunts the American psyche. It reminds us of a time when shadow organizations held sway over the daylight world. When a man could vanish from a crowded parking lot in the middle of the afternoon and leave nothing behind but a pair of white gloves and a legacy of silence. As we stand here today, looking back at that summer of 1975, we are left with the chilling realization that the perfect crime might actually exist. The perpetrators lived out their lives, some in prison for other crimes, some in freedom, but none were ever charged with the murder of James Riddle Hoffa. Justice, in this case, was not blind. It was absent. This is DCF Investigations. We have walked through the timeline, the suspects, and the theories. we have dug into the history of the labor movement and the dark underbelly of the mob. But the final chapter remains unwritten. What do you believe happened to Jimmy Hoffa? Was it the Irishman in a house in Detroit? Was it a crematorium in Hamtramck? Or is he truly buried beneath the concrete of a landmark we drive past every day? The truth is out there, buried under decades of silence and earth. Let us know your theory in the comments below, and perhaps together we can keep the search for the truth alive. Until next time, stay observant.